Well, good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to you. We're starting the conference now, and good morning to all of you who are joining us. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. My name is Jackie Glass. I'm the Principal Investigator for the Transforming Construction Network Plus, and I'll be taking you through this first part of our day. Importantly, I've got some housekeeping items to go through before we kind of kick off. But I'm also going to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen through the morning and into the afternoon as well to get you warmed up for the day. So let's do some housekeeping then. I'm sure by now many of you will be very familiar indeed with online conferences and webinars. So this will be familiar to you. We are recording these sessions so that those who weren't able to join us today can take a look again later on. And interestingly, we're on Zoom today, and one of the functionalities that we have today is for you to both ask questions, but also leave comments and thoughts, observations. So we'll be using both the Q&A function and the chat function today. In the chat, you can put your comments. What I would say, though, is that when you use these functions, you've got an option. You can either tell us who you are, or you can comment anonymously, should you wish to do so. It's entirely up to you. Of course, we'd like to hear from you. And what we'll be doing at the same time is giving you some things in the chat so that there may be some references for you to take a look at or some links, etc. So please keep an eye on the Q&A and the chat functions as we go along. We'll also be tweeting during the day, and if you'd like to tweet as well, we're using the hashtag TCN+, as we have done in our previous events, of course, and you can follow the hashtag, follow us on our Twitter account. So I think that's most of the housekeeping. I guess a little bit about us, though, would be appropriate. So the Network Plus is a project, some of you, I appreciate, will have heard this before. The Network Plus, the Transforming Construction Network Plus, is a part of the Transforming Construction Challenge, funded by the Industrial Strategy in the UK. Our role in the Network Plus has been really to, if you like, instigate a new movement, bringing academics and industry together to work on these really tricky issues, which you could argue have held back the construction industry for years. We're transforming, the industry is changing. Now is the time to come together and research this fascinating industry. I guess the Network Plus is also, you've got to think about it as spanning the digital, energy, construction and manufacturing space. This is quite a holistic and systemic challenge that we're looking at here, innovation across that entire space. So what we're doing is then trying to link up industry colleagues, academic colleagues, policy makers, etc. Let's work together. So our title of our conference today really captures that. Last year it was creating a movement for change, and this year it's embracing the movement for change. Our partners on the project are listed on the screen. So myself and colleagues based at University College London in the Bartlett Faculty of the Built Environment, colleagues from Imperial College London, Warwick Manufacturing Group, and also University of Sussex. Now, within all of that, clearly many other people are involved. And actually, the way that we work is very inclusive. So if you haven't had a chance to look at what we're doing, there's the website at the bottom of your screen right now. At any point through the conference, dip in and out of the content that we're offering today, but revisit things that we've done on our website, including the digests, which I've just got behind me there, which are available to download as free PDFs. So let's look at then today. Let's see what we've got ahead of us today. Well, I'm kicking off this morning, and it's going to be my pleasure shortly to introduce a keynote from Paul Chan. I'm going to give you a few introductory words before we start that. But let's look ahead to the rest of the day. We've got essentially 4 sessions, including this one. We'll move on from our keynote, which is going to set the scene and get us warmed up intellectually and energetically ready for the day. We're going to move on to a very good discussion session with a whole raft of leading industry and academic commentators. What kind of construction industry do we want? We're already getting some people on Twitter talking about what kind of industry they would like to see as well. So we kick off with that one. We're going to take a little break at that point over the lunch period, but we'll be back for 1 o'clock when Professor Jennifer White from Imperial College London will be chairing an absolutely outstanding session, a transatlantic session, if you will. When will digital deliver on its promise? With a raft of, again, academic and industry speakers there, bringing insights and provocative thoughts about the digital component of construction. And then we'll close out the day talking about supply chains, arguably the space where all of this comes to life. And my colleague from Warwick Manufacturing Group, Jan Godsall, will be chairing that session. And again, we've got a transatlantic feel to that one as well. We've got folks from industry in the UK and Lisa Elverum from Florida, who's an academic. And I'll be back at the end of the day to close out and offer some final thoughts. So plenty to have a look at today, and I'm really looking forward to the sessions, but also watching your comments come in and your questions, etc. through the day. So I welcome you to take part as we go along. Okay. So in the conference website, you'll actually find some really nice detailed overviews and introductions, biographies of all of our speakers today. I suspect some of them will be familiar to you, but you may not know all of them. So there's a chance to have a look at the work they're doing. And obviously, as I say, we'll be linking through into chat and showing you a few things as we go along through the day. But we've got some fantastic speakers coming up. All the way through the day. I think we've got another slide of our speakers. You'll see then that we've got both academics, we've got people who are very experienced in the design and engineering and manufacturing space, people who are leading construction businesses, and also people who are trying to transform the supply chains that are critical to our industry as well. So there's plenty to go at today, but you know, we really, it's a shame we can't meet in person, but let's try our best today to have our interaction using the Zoom platform that we've got. I'm absolutely convinced there'll be some great things to listen to. And now, really, this is the point where you work out, actually, you're one of many people who have decided to join our event today. And we've got a couple of slides just now, really, to show you the breadth of academic representation that we have from the UK, from Europe, from Australia, from America. We have a raft of people tuning into our events today. And this is very typical of our events. We're reaching out to colleagues and specialist construction innovation units across the world and business schools to get really to harness intellectual energy and bring it to the fore in the transforming construction space. So we have a raft of academics and, of course, to match, a raft of industry guests on our sessions as well. And what you'll see here, again, we've got a really lovely mixture of, if you like, clients, suppliers, consultants, we've got manufacturers, we've got modular folks, we've got IT consultants, platform companies, specialist consultants, house builders, a lovely range of people to contribute, and I'm hoping to hear from many of you in the chat and QA functions today. So we've got about 400 people registered through the day, and it does include policymakers, people from around the regions of the UK. A warm welcome to those of you joining us from Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and also as far away I see as New Zealand. So congratulations to those of you from New Zealand joining us. I can't, it must be your evening for you. So a good evening to all of you. So thank you for joining us, I guess is the message at this point. It's going to be a great day. But when I close the session in a little while, I'll be reminding you to keep in touch. So why don't we move on then, we're going to start to get ready for our keynote presentation. Now, what's important here is that Professor Paul Chan has been an outstanding commentator on the construction industry and the construction management academic discipline as well. He's known to many of you. He was previously at the University of Manchester and he's now in the Netherlands at TU Delft. We asked Paul to offer some introductory thoughts for our day. He was absolutely delighted to do that, and I've been so impressed by the thoughtfulness and the clear messaging that Paul is able to offer us. Now, Paul's not able to join us live at this point, but he will be joining us a little bit later on in person. So he's been kind enough to record his keynote for us. And in a moment, I'm going to ask our Network Plus team to run his video. I'm going to then offer you a few thoughts afterwards. And I'm hoping that this will really set you up for the day in terms of getting those brain cells working, thinking about the issues. Paul's going to take us on a wonderful story for about 20 minutes or so, talking around some examples and some thoughts that he's had about, importantly, look at that title, Embracing the Social Movement for Change, which gives you a little clue as to perhaps the angle that Paul is going to take. During this session, you can use the Q&A function, you can use the chat function, and what we're going to be doing is taking a note of what you said, and then when Paul joins us live in the next session of our day today, I'll be ready to pose some of your questions to him, and he'll take part in the discussion panel. So, why not start your day with Paul Chan's amazing thoughts about embracing the social movement for change in our industry. And I'm going to ask Doreen now to start the video. I'm going to turn myself off when it started. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be back again in about 20 minutes or so to reflect on what we've seen.
Hello everyone, my name is Paul Chan, and I'm the Chair of Design and Construction Management in the Faculty of Architecture in the Built Environment at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. In 1989, the BBC broadcast an episode of Tomorrow's World, a television program that reported on technological developments of the day. In this episode, the presenters discussed projections of technologies that would feature in the home environment in 2020. Among these included lighting that can be switched on and off by sensing human movements, wireless charging of batteries, and virtual assistants that played music on demand. The fact that these technologies exist today is a testament to the triumph of technological development, optimism, and imagination. At the same time, the fact that not every home in 2020 has these technologies also shows that the diffusion and adoption of new technologies is uneven, and that there are social reasons as to why the technological forecasts of tomorrow's world are not as widespread today. Connecting to the theme of today's conference, my talk is entitled Embracing the Social Movement for Change. In this talk, I will draw on my research and the research of my colleagues in Delft to emphasize the importance of people and their social practices in transforming construction. As Ulrich Branner from Let's Build stressed in his video, it is not technology but people who deliver better outcomes. 2020 is of course a year of the unexpected. Over the past few months, we were all bracing for impact as severe disruption happened all over the world. With lockdowns and work stoppages on site, we saw renewed calls to invest in the transformative power of digital technologies and automation. In this recent McKinsey report, future scenarios suggested that construction could be transformed into a more integrated and coordinated industrialized process, where digital technologies coupled with new materials and new actors could disrupt and turn construction into a high-performing, resilient sector. The emphasis in the next normal in construction is one that revolves around change, driven primarily by technological innovation. And the majority of executives polled for this report seem to agree that these shifts are likely to happen within the next 5 years, accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis. Yet this is not the first time we have heard of calls for transforming construction. Over 20 years ago, Sir John Egan led the construction task force to call for radical change in the ways we build. Although the digital world was still emerging back then, the task force also wished that the industry could change within 5 years by embracing technologies and practices from the manufacturing and service industries. Back in 1998, Rethinking Construction created the movement for innovation, where demonstration projects emerged to show how new technologies and management practices could yield higher performance. I guess today's movement for change is a much more down-to-earth proposition as we move beyond the hype of innovation to concentrate on what works. But one quote that I find still interesting and relevant from Rethinking Construction today is this: notwithstanding the belief in prefabrication and standardization, what the construction task force found surprising when they compared with the more productive sites in Europe was that the reasons for efficiency gains were not simply due to technological innovation. And this point is also underscored by the more recent Construction Leadership Council's roadmap to post-COVID-19 recovery. Although the adoption of digital and manufacturing technology still features prominently in transforming construction, there is also acknowledgement of the importance and value of adopting better procurement processes and developing strong partnerships across the value chain. Nevertheless, the dominant narrative as I see it still lies with the allure of new technologies. Without a doubt, new technologies can be a force for positive change. After all, digital tools are what allow me to join you in and participate in today's conference without leaving my office in the Netherlands. That said, it is perhaps easier to call for investments in new technologies to pursue the ambitious performance targets of reducing delivery times, costs, and environmental emissions than it is to shine the spotlight on people and process issues. Where organizational issues feature, these tend to be short-handed as better procurement approaches or new business models for building strong partnerships. Less attention is, however, placed on how to put these models to work in practice. It is this focus on practices that formed the basis of a study on transforming the mechanical and electrical process. In 2013, I received funding from the Research Council in collaboration with Langeroog to explore the prospects of shifting the business model from a product-based focus to a service-based focus using M&E process as a context. By expanding into services, companies like Langeroog were drawing inspiration from other sectors like the aerospace industry and consumer goods market to find new ways to diversify and sustain their revenue streams. At that time, there was, and still is today, quite some hype around service-based business models. Rather than to simply sell products, companies also bundled together services such as maintenance. Yet when my doctoral students spoke with the practitioners, we quickly realized that many people simply went about their everyday life without worrying about the business model in which they were operating. Some may have heard of the term business models, but for many, the label really did not mean that much to their everyday lives. So we decided to examine what it took in their everyday practices to make this transformation from a product-based business model to a service-based business model for companies like Langeroog. Using M&E processes as the example, we adopted this framework called Cultural Historical Activity Theory to study changes in the M&E activity system. This allowed us not only to look at the technological tools, but also other aspects such as the stakeholders and community of practitioners involved, and the rules of engagement in making the transformation. I will now provide a simplified narrative of an example of the modular plant room. Early on in our study, the modular plant room featured quite a bit in our conversations with the practitioners. Moving from a product focus to a service focus meant that attention shifted from selling the energy system to selling predictive performance. This meant that more detailed technical information was required from the equipment manufacturers and suppliers. Traditionally, when the focus was on selling the product, equipment manufacturers tended to only provide operating manuals and information about warranties. However, in selling predictive performance, there is a need to provide information on lifetime performance so that the company installing the system could work out the level of pricing and services on offer. But this was not standard practice. In some cases, such technical information was not available. And in other cases, even if information was available, these were treated as commercially sensitive information not to be shared by the equipment manufacturers. So this raised a contradiction. From the equipment supplier's point of view, there was little or no incentive to produce detailed technical information, while companies that installed the product would need such information to transform the system. To resolve this contradiction, Laing needed to build strong partnerships and trust with equipment manufacturers so that they could get access to better insights and deeper knowledge about the technologies that the equipment manufacturers were supplying. This also meant that Laing had to become more selective as to who they partnered with. So for example, over the course of our research, they reduced the number of partners that supplied feed pumps to boilers from 10 to 3. Engaging with equipment suppliers early on in the process became quite critical. But this gave rise to yet another contradiction. Existing procurement processes and ways of doing projects did not lend naturally to early engagement with equipment suppliers. Design managers were also not used to engaging with the level of technical detail about boiler technologies and their specific components. Furthermore, even if a boiler was deemed optimal for providing predictive performance throughout the life of the building, procurement rules also tended to favor the lowest price and not the most optimal. Laing was nevertheless in a unique position because they had also acquired a company that offered specialized M&E services. This acquisition enabled them to work around restrictive procurement practices and resolve the contradiction to co-innovate with equipment suppliers. Another significant area of attention was the need to understand failure modes of the energy equipment. This created the need to seek out technological solutions, and they began to invest in sensing capabilities. On the one hand, to better evaluate the lifetime performance of equipment components, and on the other hand, to better capture the behavior of end users and understand how occupant behavior contributed to failure rates. This created another contradiction. While sensing capabilities potentially provided new insights and intelligence, too much data also created the need to employ data analysts to analyze the data, capability that they never used to need. Furthermore, on the hospital project, while understanding the physics of failure led to scenarios for optimization, this also created conversations around whether or not energy equipment could be shut down during periods of low use. This became quite a topic of discussion, since hospital spaces also perform critical healthcare functions, which meant that technical optimization had to be balanced with critical service delivery, even during times of low energy usage. In this simplified narrative of the struggles and contradictions faced in everyday practices of transforming a business model, conversations about value capture and creation are ongoing as supply-side and demand-side actors come together and try to articulate the benefits of system transformation and work through emerging contradictions. And this certainly took much longer than anyone could have anticipated at the beginning of the project. But what I hope I have shown here is the richness of the practices of making things happen. In the world of standardization, we often think of variations and contradictions as roadblocks to transforming construction. But what we found is that contradictions are necessary to bring together different stakeholders to define the problem space and the solution space. Another takeaway for us was that learning from other industries was also not a case of copying and pasting. When Langmarook was first interested in adding more services to their portfolio, they were inspired by the aerospace sector. Companies like Rolls-Royce had developed, for instance, the total care approach to bundle together services when leasing the aero engines. At that time, I was also teaching aerospace engineers in the University of Manchester, and so I took the opportunity to learn from my students who were also working in Rolls-Royce on the total care approach. What we learned from the engineers was that refining the total care approach was and still is an ongoing journey that took 25 years. They also had to think about getting more intelligence about lifetime performance of the engines. They had to learn about the behaviors of the pilots from the range of airlines they served and how pilot behavior affected engine performance. And they also had to consider how they managed the resource requirements of data analytics and whether or not to keep this capability in-house. Along the way, similar contradictions also emerged, and one benefit of diving deeper into the social practices of system transformation was that we could identify where there were similarities, but also more importantly, where there were also differences between the aerospace and construction sectors, so that we could learn the appropriate lessons to drive through change more quickly. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that we often think of Rolls-Royce's total care approach as an innovation driven by Rolls-Royce. But the initial driver was in fact introduced by one of their major clients, American Airlines. In transforming construction, we often see a greater emphasis on changing supply practices. It is therefore also equally important that we start to understand and address demand. Before I close, I want to share with you a couple of projects and initiatives in the Netherlands that I think are relevant to creating the social movement for change. The first project deals with building logistics, and this involves colleagues from Delft and other research and knowledge institutions, as well as value chain partners. In the Cross-Chain Control Center of 4C in Building Logistics, the aim was to combine just-in-time logistics with the concept of bundling. Rather than for each supplier of building materials and components to deliver to site, the 4C project explored ways of bundling supply and using a distribution hub to optimize and reduce the amount of traffic heading to site. With digital tools, the 4C project demonstrated the viability of making a more coordinated approach to handling logistics to the building site. And this reduced congestion and environmental emissions by quite a bit, particularly in city center sites. Here is an example of a dashboard capturing real-time routing information based on congestion prepared by Fokker vessels. And since this is the Netherlands, they also had to factor in the number of cyclists, since cyclists can often create problems and delays in the delivery process. The key lessons learned from the final report are noteworthy. While it is important to provide insights on costs and benefits of the new logistics system early on in the design process, the consortium also recognized that there are times when new information needed to be collected. And as the example of linking it with cycling traffic showed, the information that mattered requires cooperation across different sectors. Sometimes sectors that we are not used to collaborating with before. Of course, digital tools can help in this regard, but only if the tools are easy to use. So that is again why it is important to pay attention to social practices on the ground. Finally, while 4C designed a new way of thinking about building logistics, there was also a lot of ongoing evaluation and learning that took place. This evaluation was often supported by students working on their project reports and research thesis. And these students are of course an integral part in the pipeline of future talent for the sector. By exposing the students to a different way of thinking and working, they can then move on to become significant agents of change in the future. This learning by and with students is also the case with the Langeroute project on MEP services. The doctoral researcher graduated, and he is now taking the lessons learned to his current work in Siemens on the maintenance of smart motorways. Creating the social movement for change takes time. Over the past year, the Building Technology Innovation Center, or BTIC for short, was launched with a long-term view that stretches to 2050. This is an initiative that in the next 5 years will build and consolidate knowledge from a range of partners, including knowledge institutions like universities, FE colleges, research institutes, and key players in industry. The idea is not to reinvent the wheel, but to build a strong knowledge base so that we can tackle the critical challenges of building the circular economy, addressing the energy transition to reduce dependency on natural gas, and digital transformation. From this knowledge base, applications can be created and experimented with, and the end goal is to create a more sustainable sector in the long run. So this is about thinking and planning for tomorrow, but acting today. And lessons learned from the 4C project in building logistics are now also taken forward in BTIC, with colleagues exploring the possibility of not only bundling supply, but also of bundling demand to achieve higher degrees of coordination. We hope to capture the ongoing change so that effective guidance on practices can be produced. These collaborations require quite a lot of stepping outside of our comfort zone, stretching beyond our knowledge domains to work across disciplines and sectors that we are perhaps less familiar with. I have just started a 5-year research project called Stepping Out. The aim of Stepping Out is to document how we can learn more effectively in collaborations between academia and industry, across professions and disciplines and between sectors. We'll be paying attention to contradictions that emerge through transdisciplinary collaborations in urban transformations in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, to examine how stakeholders work through conflicts of language, styles of reasoning, and vested interests across organizations. The challenge of transforming construction is not just technical. I hope to have persuaded you that non-technical matters matter a great deal. In a recent briefing paper I wrote for the Institution of Civil Engineers, Journal of Management, Procurement and Law, I stressed that in moving towards the fourth industrial revolution in construction, there is a need to go beyond the current technical frame to think about people and process issues, and also about the outcomes. Is transforming construction just about improving productivity and driving down delivery times, costs, and environmental emissions? Or is it also about creating and embracing better jobs and a better future in society? These are all ethical and values-based choices that we need to consider. To conclude, here are 3 key takeaways that I hope I have shared in today's talk. First, technology is often portrayed as the answer to transforming construction. For me, technology is the start of new questions that we have perhaps not thought about before. Questions that will bring about contradictions that can and will drive new collaborations and solutions. Second, the emphasis has so far been on what technologies can do for us. This focus on supply must also be balanced by driving the demand for change. In addition to promoting what technologies can do for us, we should also ask and reflect on the use and usefulness of these technologies. How does technological transformation make the lives of those working in the industry better and easier? Third and finally, we all need to step in and work together. And to do so, we need to step outside of what we are familiar with. Hopefully, today's conference can facilitate that stepping out and allow us to all grow our knowledge domains. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, those of you who have joined us during this session. I hope you can hear and see me now. Paul offers us a remarkable insight here into a series of projects. And what's interesting for me, there's a few things to pick up on really to close out and reflect on what he's shared with us. He clearly puts people at the centre of this, which for me is critical, and for many researchers also. But what I particularly enjoy about Paul's keynote there is where he talks about the richness of the practice of making things happen. How do we actually embrace change? How does it actually happen? And it's those sort of projects, as Paul talks through, the Langer-Rourke project, where this sort of deep delve, this deep exploration of what is really going on the ground really helps us to understand this interplay, technology, systems and people. I think he also articulates very clearly the contribution that academics can make to transformation within either a firm or a sector. And he does invite us at the end, doesn't he, to step outside of our comfort zone. I think we all need a reminder of that every so often, don't we? But there's some points of debate in what Paul is talking about. He's saying a little bit about partnerships, and we've got some questions coming up in the chat around the partnerships and collaborations and actually making them happen. And I particularly enjoyed the sort of the use of the term bundling. It sounds tremendously simple and easy to do, doesn't it? But actually, I suspect making it really happen is extremely difficult. So some takeaways there from Paul, and I think a really nice start to our day. What we're going to do now is we're going to close this particular session. And what I'd like you to do is to be able to rejoin us. You have a separate Zoom link for the next session in your emails, I believe. And we're going to come back with a panel. Each panel member is going to give us a short presentation, and Paul will join us for the discussion session. So those of you who've asked questions, I should have time to at least pose a couple of those to Paul and bring them into our discussion a bit later. As you see on screen right now, there's an email address just there, so do drop us a line if you're experiencing any challenges today in viewing what we're offering during the day, but also if you've got any queries or comments. As I said before, those of you joined partway through, anything that you've added into the questions and chat for this particular session, we'll be taking those through to our next session. Now, if you'd like to rejoin on our new link, we'll be starting at 9:45. I'll be taking you through that session, and we will be talking about what kind of construction industry do we want. So at that point, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Paul for providing us with a very thoughtful and insightful start to our day. And without further ado, I will let you all have a short break, refresh your coffees, a glass of water, stretch your legs, and do join us again at 9:45 BST. Good morning.